Speech carries consequences that often unfold long after the moment has passed. A few words spoken without restraint can change relationships, weaken trust, and open doors to regret that were never meant to be opened. Islam teaches that true wisdom is not found in reacting quickly, defending yourself, or proving a point, but in knowing when to remain silent for the sake of Allah. There are specific moments in life where silence becomes protection rather than avoidance. Moments where holding your tongue preserves your iman, safeguards your dignity, and prevents sins that begin with a single careless word. This reminder is about recognizing those situations, understanding their seriousness, and learning how silence can become a powerful form of self-control and obedience, one that Allah loves and rewards. Speech becomes a burden when it is spoken without purpose. Not every word earns reward, and not every reaction pleases Allah. Islam teaches that the tongue carries responsibility, and when it moves without wisdom, it can quietly drain the heart of barakah. Silence in such moments preserves what careless speech would waste. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught that goodness in speech is the measure, not quantity. Words spoken for ego, attention, or emotional release carry no weight in the sight of Allah. When speech does not guide, heal, or bring benefit, it becomes a distraction rather than an act of worship. Often the desire to speak comes from the urge to justify oneself. The heart wants to explain, defend, or correct others immediately. Yet Allah does not measure truth by volume or speed. Choosing silence when words serve only pride protects the heart from losing sincerity. Speech loses its reward when it is driven by anger. In moments of irritation, the tongue becomes reckless, and even truthful words can turn harmful. The Prophet, peace be upon him, warned against speaking while emotions are uncontrolled, because silence at such times guards faith and character. Sometimes speaking brings no reward because it leads to argument rather than understanding. Winning a debate does not always mean pleasing Allah. Silence, when debate feeds arrogance, becomes an act of humility that Allah loves far more than verbal victory. Words spoken to expose others, embarrass them, or assert superiority are empty of reward. Even if facts are correct, intention matters deeply. Allah looks at the heart behind the speech, not the sharpness of the tongue. Silence keeps the believer safe from harming others unjustly. Speech can also lose reward when it spreads negativity. Complaints, constant criticism, or unnecessary commentary weigh heavily on the soul. The Prophet, peace be upon him, encouraged speech that uplifts and silence that prevents harm. Remaining quiet protects the heart from becoming hardened. Sometimes the test lies in restraint, not expression. Allah watches how a believer reacts when provoked or misunderstood. Silence chosen for Allah's sake is recorded as obedience even when it feels uncomfortable. Words spoken to satisfy emotion fade quickly, but restraint leaves lasting reward. Speech without reward often leads to regret. Once words leave the tongue, they cannot be taken back. Silence leaves no wounds to heal and no apologies to offer. Allah's mercy is present in moments where silence saves a believer from consequences they never intended. The tongue can distract from remembrance of Allah when it moves excessively. Silence allows space for reflection, gratitude, and awareness of Allah's presence. The Prophet, peace be upon him, lived with measured speech, showing that balance brings peace to the heart. Sometimes silence is misunderstood by people, but Allah understands it fully. Speaking to please others while displeasing Allah brings no reward. Silence chosen to preserve faith carries unseen value, even if it costs momentary comfort. Speech loses reward when it fuels division. Words spoken without necessity can turn small misunderstandings into lasting conflict. Silence prevents harm before it grows. Allah loves peace among hearts, and restraint supports harmony more than explanation ever could. The believer learns over time that not every situation requires response. Silence teaches patience, wisdom, and trust in Allah's justice. When the tongue rests, the heart strengthens. This inner strength is a gift Allah grants to those who restrain themselves. Humility grows when the believer accepts that not every thought must be voiced. Silence reminds the heart of its limits and Allah's authority. The Prophet, peace be upon him, showed that humility in speech elevates a person far more than constant expression. Speech that brings no reward often serves the self, while silence serves Allah. Recognizing this difference is a sign of spiritual maturity. Choosing silence becomes a conscious act of faith rather than avoidance. When speaking brings no reward from Allah, silence becomes protection. It guards faith, preserves dignity, and keeps the heart aligned with obedience. Following the guidance of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the believer learns that sometimes the most powerful response is saying nothing at all. Silence often stands between a believer and regret. In moments when emotions rise quickly, the tongue can move faster than wisdom. Words spoken in haste may feel justified at the time, but their weight is often felt later. Allah, in His mercy, gives the believer the option of silence so that regret does not become part of their story. Regret usually follows speech that was never carefully considered. When the heart is angry, wounded, or overwhelmed, clarity disappears. Silence gives the heart time to settle and allows reason to return. Allah protects His servant by making restraint possible in moments when speech would only complicate matters. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught that a believer's safety often lies in controlling the tongue. This guidance was not given to restrict expression, but to protect the heart. Silence chosen at the right moment prevents words from becoming a source of shame or sorrow later. Many regrets are born from speaking while emotions are unsettled. Anger, jealousy, or pride can push words out that do not reflect true intention. Silence interrupts this cycle. It creates a pause where the heart can realign with what pleases Allah instead of reacting to temporary feelings. Silence saves the believer from explaining themselves unnecessarily. Not every misunderstanding needs clarification, and not every accusation deserves a response. Allah sees the truth even when others do not. Remaining silent protects dignity and prevents regret that comes from overexposure. Words spoken under pressure often sound harsher than intended. Once spoken, they cannot be reshaped. Silence keeps relationships from being damaged beyond repair. Allah values peace between hearts, and restraint supports harmony far more than emotional expression. The Prophet, peace be upon him, lived with careful speech, showing that silence is strength, not weakness. He understood that silence can stop harm before it begins. Following this example helps the believer avoid regret that lingers long after the moment has passed. Regret is painful because it cannot be undone. Silence leaves nothing to undo. Allah's wisdom is found in the moments when a believer chooses not to speak, trusting that restraint is safer than reaction. This trust transforms silence into protection. Sometimes silence saves the believer from sin that begins with a single sentence. Words spoken in frustration can lead to backbiting, accusation, or injustice. Silence blocks this path before it opens. Allah rewards those who protect themselves from sin through self-control. The heart often urges speech as a form of relief. It feels lighter after expressing frustration, but regret soon replaces that relief. Silence teaches patience, allowing emotions to pass without leaving damage behind. Allah replaces restraint with calm that lasts longer than momentary release. Silence also saves the believer from harming their own character. Words spoken impulsively can contradict values the heart holds dear. Remaining silent preserves integrity and consistency. Allah loves believers whose actions reflect their principles even under pressure. Regret often comes from trying to win moments instead of protecting faith. Silence shifts focus away from winning arguments and toward pleasing Allah. This shift keeps the heart aligned with what truly matters and prevents unnecessary sorrow. The Prophet, peace be upon him, emphasized mercy, patience, and wisdom in speech. His example teaches that silence can be an act of mercy toward oneself and others. Choosing silence reflects trust in Allah's justice rather than reliance on personal defense. Silence allows the believer to reflect before responding. This reflection often reveals that speech was never required. Allah grants insight to hearts that pause instead of react. This insight saves the believer from words they would later wish had never been spoken. Silence becomes a shield against regret. It protects faith, preserves relationships, and guards the heart from pain caused by careless words. By following the guidance of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the believer learns that silence at the right time is one of Allah's greatest protections. A small issue often begins quietly without danger or intention of harm. It may start as a misunderstanding, a difference of opinion, or a moment of discomfort. On its own, it carries little weight. Yet when words are added carelessly, that small issue can grow quickly into something heavy, sinful, and difficult to repair. Islam teaches that the tongue has the power to magnify what the heart could have resolved with patience. Words can change the nature of a situation instantly. What could have ended with silence or calm explanation becomes charged with emotion once the tongue is involved. Tone sharpens, assumptions form, and hearts begin to harden. Allah warns the believer through experience that not every matter should be spoken about openly, especially when speech adds heat rather than clarity. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught that a believer must be cautious with speech because words can transform minor faults into major consequences. A comment spoken lightly can become an accusation. A joke can become humiliation. A complaint can become backbiting. The issue did not change, but the words changed its weight before Allah. Often, sin enters through exaggeration. A small problem is described as something far worse than it truly is. The tongue adds emotion, blame, and judgment. What began as a simple concern becomes injustice. Allah dislikes exaggeration because it distorts truth and harms hearts unnecessarily. Words can also turn a small issue into sin through gossip. A matter that should have remained private is shared, then repeated, then reshaped. Each retelling adds something new. Soon, the issue no longer belongs to the people involved, but to everyone listening. The Prophet, peace be upon him, warned strongly against speech that spreads harm without benefit. Anger makes this process faster. When emotions rise, words lose restraint. A small mistake becomes an attack, and a simple disagreement becomes hostility. Silence at the beginning could have protected everyone involved. Allah allows the believer the chance to pause so that anger does not turn into sin. Sometimes the sin comes from intention rather than content. Words spoken to embarrass, shame, or assert dominance carry no goodness. Even if the issue was small, the intention behind speech makes it serious. Allah looks at the heart before the tongue, and harmful intentions corrupt even truthful words. Words can also turn a small issue into sin by reopening matters that Allah had already covered. A resolved issue is mentioned again, not for improvement, but for reminder or criticism. This revives pain and resentment. Islam encourages covering faults, not reviving them through unnecessary speech. The Prophet, peace be upon him, showed restraint even when correcting others. He addressed issues with wisdom and care, ensuring that speech healed rather than harmed. His example teaches that correction without compassion turns advice into sin, even when the issue itself was minor. Sometimes words transform a small issue into sin by inviting others to take sides. Speech becomes a tool to gain sympathy or support. This divides hearts and creates tension where none needed to exist. Allah loves unity, and silence often preserves it better than explanation. Complaining excessively also enlarges small issues. The heart begins to focus on negativity, and gratitude fades. What was once manageable feels overwhelming. Words shape perception, and constant negative speech trains the heart to see problems as bigger than they are. A small issue can become sin when words are spoken without verification. Assumptions replace facts, and suspicion replaces understanding. Islam warns against speaking without knowledge because it leads to injustice. Silence protects the believer from falling into this trap. The believer learns that not every issue requires response. Some matters resolve themselves when left untouched. Words interfere with this natural resolution. Allah teaches through experience that silence often closes doors that speech would open unnecessarily. Words can also turn a small issue into sin when they are spoken publicly instead of privately. What could have been resolved quietly becomes a matter of pride and image. Allah values humility, and silence often reflects it better than public discussion. Choosing silence in these moments is not avoidance. It is awareness of how easily sin can grow from speech. The believer protects faith by restraining the tongue, trusting that Allah sees what was left unsaid. Small issues become sinful not because of their size, but because of what words add to them. By following the guidance of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the believer learns that silence keeps matters small, clean, and free from regret, while careless speech turns light moments into heavy burdens. Sometimes Allah tests a believer not through hardship, but through restraint. Silence becomes the ground where self-control is examined. The urge to speak rises strongly, yet the heart is asked to pause. In this pause, Allah observes sincerity, patience, and obedience that no one else can see. Self-control is tested most when silence feels unfair. The believer may feel misunderstood, wrongly accused, or overlooked. Words seem ready to defend honor or clarify truth. Yet Allah allows the situation to remain unresolved, to see whether trust in Him outweighs the desire to speak. Silence during testing is never meaningless. Allah uses it to reveal the strength of the heart. A tongue that remains restrained while emotions are stirred reflects a heart anchored in faith. This restraint carries reward because it is chosen, not forced. The Prophet, peace be upon him, demonstrated self-control through silence during moments of provocation. He showed that dignity is preserved when the tongue rests and the heart relies on Allah. His example teaches that silence can be a form of strength greater than speech. Allah tests self-control when speech would bring immediate relief. Releasing frustration through words feels satisfying, but that relief fades quickly. Silence, although heavier at first, brings lasting calm. Allah wants the believer to choose what heals long term rather than what comforts briefly. Silence tests whether the believer trusts Allah's justice. When words are withheld, the heart must believe that Allah sees everything. This trust is not passive, it is active reliance. Allah values hearts that remain steady without demanding immediate validation. Self-control through silence also tests humility. The ego desires to be heard, acknowledged, and understood. Silence humbles the heart, reminding it that approval from Allah matters more than recognition from people. This humility strengthens faith quietly. Allah uses silence to test patience during misunderstanding. Clarification may seem necessary, yet Allah delays resolution. The believer learns to wait without resentment. This patience refines character and strengthens emotional discipline. Silence tests consistency in faith. It is easy to remain calm when situations are clear. When confusion arises, silence becomes challenging. Allah observes whether the believer maintains good character even when circumstances invite reaction. The heart is also tested in moments of injustice. Words could expose wrongdoing, yet silence is chosen for wisdom, not fear. Allah sees the intention behind restraint. This choice reflects deep reliance on divine judgment rather than personal defense. The Prophet, peace be upon him, endured moments where silence spoke louder than words. His restraint taught that self-control is a sign of maturity, not weakness. Following this example allows believers to rise above momentary impulses. Silence during testing strengthens inner discipline. Each moment of restraint builds emotional control that carries into other areas of life. Allah prepares the believer for greater responsibilities through these quiet trials. Self-control through silence also protects the believer from regret. Words spoken under testing often leave lasting scars. Silence leaves no wound behind. Allah's mercy is present in moments where restraint prevents harm. Allah tests silence to teach awareness. The believer becomes mindful of intentions, emotions, and reactions. This awareness transforms silence into conscious worship rather than passive absence. When silence is chosen for Allah's sake, the test becomes a source of reward. The heart grows stronger, calmer, and more trusting. Allah replaces the weight of restraint with inner peace that words could never provide. When Allah tests self-control through silence, He is not depriving the believer. He is elevating them. By following the path shown by the Prophet, peace be upon him, the believer learns that silence during testing is a sign of faith that Allah values deeply. Honor is one of the greatest gifts Allah grants to a believer, and it is closely tied to how the tongue is used. Words spoken carelessly can strip away dignity in moments, while silence can protect it for a lifetime. Remaining quiet at the right time preserves not only reputation, but also the inner state of faith that Allah values far more than public approval. Faith is often tested through speech. When emotions rise or pressure increases, the tongue becomes a gateway to either obedience or regret. Choosing silence in these moments shields Iman from cracks that words can create. Allah preserves the faith of those who restrain themselves for His sake. Honor is weakened when speech is driven by ego. The need to explain, defend, or prove oneself often comes from pride rather than truth. Silence humbles the heart and reminds the believer that Allah is the ultimate defender. This humility strengthens faith quietly and consistently. The Prophet, peace be upon him, showed that dignity is maintained through restraint. His silence in moments of provocation demonstrated trust in Allah's justice. By following his example, the believer learns that honor does not require constant speech to survive. Remaining quiet protects the believer from self-inflicted harm. Words spoken in frustration can linger in the hearts of others long after emotions fade. Silence prevents wounds that speech would create. Allah loves hearts that choose peace over momentary release. Faith is preserved when silence prevents sin. Backbiting, accusation, and harsh speech often begin when restraint is lost. Silence closes these doors before they open. Allah rewards believers who protect their Iman by guarding their tongues. Honor also lies in consistency. A believer who remains calm and measured in speech earns respect without demanding it. Silence reinforces this consistency, showing that faith guides behavior even under pressure. Allah strengthens those whose actions align with their beliefs. Remaining quiet protects personal boundaries. Not every thought needs expression, and not every situation needs commentary. Silence allows the believer to choose what truly matters. This discernment preserves both dignity and spiritual focus. The heart remains clean when the tongue rests. Excessive speech often leads to regret, while silence allows reflection. Allah grants clarity to hearts that are not cluttered with unnecessary words. This clarity strengthens faith and self-awareness. Honor is preserved when silence prevents public conflict. Arguments played out through words often damage reputations on all sides. Silence de-escalates tension and allows Allah's wisdom to guide outcomes. The believer who remains quiet avoids unnecessary exposure. Faith grows when silence is chosen despite temptation to speak. This choice reflects reliance on Allah rather than self-defense. Allah sees restraint even when others misunderstand it. This unseen obedience carries immense reward. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught that true strength lies in self-control. Silence reflects mastery over impulse and emotion. By practicing this restraint, the believer protects both honor and Iman simultaneously. Remaining quiet also preserves trust. Words spoken carelessly can break confidence and damage relationships. Silence maintains reliability and integrity. Allah values believers whose presence brings safety rather than fear. Honor is preserved when silence avoids exaggeration. Speech often amplifies small matters into serious issues. Silence keeps matters contained and manageable. Allah loves moderation in all things, including speech. Faith benefits when silence prevents the heart from becoming hardened. Harsh words leave marks on the soul. Silence softens the heart, allowing compassion and patience to grow. This softness strengthens connection with Allah. Remaining quiet allows Allah to handle matters beyond human control. Trust replaces anxiety when the tongue rests. Allah's justice operates without the believer needing to intervene verbally. This reliance preserves spiritual balance. Honor remains intact when silence avoids unnecessary disclosure. Personal struggles and private matters lose dignity when spoken openly. Silence keeps them protected. Allah honors those who guard what He has entrusted to them. Faith deepens when silence becomes intentional rather than forced. Choosing restraint transforms silence into worship. Allah rewards intention even when action appears small. the believer grows closer to Him through mindful quietness. The heart learns maturity through silence. Responding less teaches discernment and wisdom. Allah prepares believers for greater responsibility by training them in restraint. This preparation preserves honor over time. Remaining quiet also protects future regret. Words cannot be reclaimed once spoken. Silence leaves nothing to undo. Allah's mercy is evident in moments where restraint prevents lasting damage. When remaining quiet preserves honor and faith, the believer realizes that silence was never emptiness. It was protection, obedience, and trust combined. By following the guidance of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the believer learns that dignity and iman are safest when the tongue moves only with wisdom. Responding can feel justified when emotions are strong and the heart believes it is right. Words line up quickly, ready to defend, correct, or explain. Yet, wisdom often lives in restraint, not reaction. Allah teaches the believer that what feels right in the moment is not always what is best for the soul. The urge to respond usually comes from emotion rather than reflection. Hurt, anger, or pride push the tongue forward before the heart has settled. Silence creates space for calm to return. In that space, Allah protects the believer from words that would have caused regret. Silence becomes wiser when responding would feed ego instead of truth. The heart may want to be seen as correct, strong, or justified. Allah values humility over victory. Choosing silence shifts focus from proving oneself to pleasing Allah. The Prophet, peace be upon him, demonstrated wisdom through restraint. He remained silent in moments when others expected response, showing trust in Allah's justice. His example teaches that silence can speak louder than explanation and protect dignity without effort. Responding feels right when the believer fears misunderstanding. Silence feels risky, as if truth will be lost, yet Allah sees reality clearly, even when people do not. Trusting Allah with your reputation frees the heart from anxiety and preserves peace. Words spoken in defense often escalate situations. What begins as clarification can turn into argument. Silence prevents unnecessary conflict and keeps small matters from growing heavy. Allah loves harmony and grants reward to those who protect it through restraint. Silence becomes wiser when responding would reopen wounds. Some matters heal only when left untouched. Words revive pain and delay healing. Allah teaches through experience that not every issue benefits from discussion. Responding feels right when emotions demand release. Silence feels heavy at first, yet it brings lasting relief. Allah replaces emotional restraint with inner calm. This calm carries more peace than temporary satisfaction gained through speech. The heart learns maturity when it chooses silence over impulse. Responding quickly may feel powerful, but silence reflects strength. Allah builds emotional discipline in those who pause before speaking. This discipline supports faith in every area of life. Silence becomes wiser when responding would involve harshness. Even truthful words can wound if spoken without gentleness. Allah values mercy in speech. Choosing silence prevents harm when kindness cannot be guaranteed. Responding feels right when injustice is perceived. Silence may feel like surrender, yet Allah's justice does not require constant defense. Trusting Allah to handle matters lifts burden from the heart and preserves spiritual balance. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught that self-control defines true strength. Silence during provocation reflects mastery over the self. Following this guidance protects believers from reacting in ways that compromise character. Silence becomes wiser when responding would spread negativity. Complaints, criticism, and sarcasm leave marks on the soul. Restraint protects the heart from becoming hardened. Allah rewards hearts that choose purity over expression. Responding feels right when others provoke intentionally. Silence denies them power. Allah elevates those who refuse to engage in unnecessary confrontation. This elevation comes quietly but lasts. Silence allows time for reflection. Often the believer realizes that response was never required. Allah grants clarity to those who wait. This clarity strengthens trust and reduces impulsive regret. Responding feels right when the mind rehearses arguments. Silence interrupts this cycle. The heart rests instead of racing. Allah replaces mental noise with peace when the tongue rests. Silence becomes wiser when responding would expose private matters. Speech can strip dignity quickly. Restraint preserves honor and boundaries. Allah honors those who protect what should remain covered. Responding feels right when seeking validation. Silence redirects reliance toward Allah. This redirection strengthens faith and reduces emotional dependence on people. Allah fills the heart that turns to Him alone. Silence also teaches patience. Waiting without response trains the soul to endure discomfort with grace. Allah builds resilience through these moments. That resilience becomes a lifelong strength. Responding feels right in the moment, but silence often proves wiser in hindsight. Looking back, the believer recognizes how restraint prevented damage. Allah's wisdom becomes clearer with time. When responding feels right, but silence is wiser, the believer chooses trust over impulse. By following the path shown by the Prophet, peace be upon him, the heart learns that silence is not loss. It is protection, wisdom, and faith expressed without words. Silence can become a shield when the path towards sin begins with a single word. Many wrong actions do not start with intention, but with careless speech. The tongue opens doors the heart never meant to walk through. Allah, in His mercy, gives the believer silence as protection before harm takes shape. Sin often approaches quietly, disguised as harmless talk. A joke, a complaint, or a reaction can slowly shift into backbiting, arrogance, or anger. Silence interrupts this movement. By holding the tongue, the believer stops sin at its earliest stage before it gains strength. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught that safeguarding the tongue is part of safeguarding faith. Words have the power to lead the heart toward obedience or away from it. Silence chosen at the right moment becomes a barrier that prevents the heart from slipping into what displeases Allah. Silence protects when emotions are intense. Anger, jealousy, and pride push the tongue towards speech that crosses boundaries. Restraint blocks that push. Allah rewards the believer who resists emotional impulse by choosing quiet over expression. Sin often grows through reaction. A provocation invites response, and response invites escalation. Silence breaks this chain. By refusing to engage, the believer steps away from a path that would have led to regret. Allah grants safety to those who withdraw from harmful exchanges. Speech can also expose intentions that the heart would later regret. Silence keeps thoughts from becoming actions. Allah values this pause because it shows awareness and fear of Him. That awareness transforms silence into worship. Silence becomes a shield when it prevents gossip. Sharing information without benefit slowly erodes faith. By remaining quiet, the believer protects both their own heart and the honor of others. Allah loves those who cover faults instead of spreading them. Backbiting often feels justified in the moment. Silence removes the opportunity for justification. The believer who chooses restraint protects themselves from sin that carries heavy consequences. Allah replaces that restraint with peace of conscience. The Prophet, peace be upon him, warned against speech that harms others, even subtly. Silence honors this guidance. By holding the tongue, the believer avoids words that would stain character and weigh on the soul. Sin can also emerge through sarcasm or mockery. What feels light can wound deeply. Silence prevents humor from turning into cruelty. Allah rewards hearts that choose kindness even when silence is the only option. Silence shields the believer from exaggeration. Speech often magnifies issues beyond truth. Exaggeration distorts reality and leads to injustice. Restraint preserves honesty and keeps the heart aligned with fairness. Arguments often begin with words that were never necessary. Silence removes fuel from conflict. Allah values peace and grants reward to those who prevent harm through restraint rather than confrontation. Sin sometimes enters through self-righteous speech. Correcting others without humility hardens the heart. Silence humbles the soul and reminds it that guidance belongs to Allah. This humility protects faith. Silence also prevents sins of assumption. Speaking without full knowledge leads to injustice. By remaining quiet, the believer avoids accusing, judging, or misrepresenting others. Allah loves caution where harm could arise. The heart is protected when silence replaces complaint. Excessive complaining weakens gratitude and faith. Quiet patience preserves contentment. Allah strengthens the believer who chooses acceptance over constant expression. Silence becomes a shield when it guards private matters. Revealing what should remain hidden invites sin. Restraint preserves dignity and trust. Allah honors those who protect what He has covered. Sin often begins with trying to win moments. Silence shifts focus away from winning and toward obedience. Allah rewards those who prioritize faith over temporary satisfaction. The Prophet, peace be upon him, showed that restraint is strength. His silence at critical moments prevented harm and preserved truth. Following this example keeps the believer safe from paths that lead away from Allah. Silence also blocks the return of past sins. Revisiting old mistakes through speech revives guilt and pain. Quiet acceptance allows healing. Allah replaces silence with inner relief. When silence becomes a habit, the heart grows alert to danger. The believer recognizes moments where speech would harm faith. This awareness itself is protection granted by Allah. Silence becomes a shield between the believer and sin because it stops harm before it forms. By following the guidance of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the believer learns that holding the tongue is not emptiness, but safety, obedience, and mercy wrapped in quiet strength. The tongue is small, yet its impact reaches far into a person's faith, character, and future. When silence is chosen with awareness, it becomes more than the absence of words, it becomes protection. Allah places wisdom in restraint and safety in self-control, even when speaking feels easier in the moment. Every time you hold your tongue for the sake of Allah, something unseen is preserved. Your honor remains intact, your faith stays guarded, and your heart grows lighter. Silence does not mean weakness, it means trust. Trust that Allah sees what was left unsaid and rewards it fully. Carry this awareness forward. Not every moment needs a response, and not every feeling needs a voice. When silence stands between you and sin, choose it with confidence. Allah knows what you protected, and He never allows such restraint to go unrewarded.